Here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up this morning on the political correction, a Tory Sleaze row dominates the front pages this morning. Are donors getting seats in the House of Lords in return for cash? And an announcement is imminent on compulsory jabs for all NHS workers. But how many staff could the NHS lose if this is brought in? And John Major, well, he can't keep out of things for very long, can he? No, he is out there really saying we must stick with the Northern Ireland Protocol, come what may. I think former First Minister Arlene Foster, who's joining us today, might just have something to say about that. But first, the news.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 10 o'clock. The Health Secretary is urging the elderly and vulnerable to get their coronavirus booster jabs to help avoid a return to COVID restrictions over Christmas. Sajid Javid says young people can play their part by persuading their parents and grandparents to get the vaccine. So far, almost 10 million people have received a top-up jab, but around 30% of over 80s and 40% of over 50s in England are yet to receive it. 3 million more people in England are being invited to have their booster next week. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has warned that former MP Owen Paterson should not be granted a peerage. In a letter to the House of Lords Appointments Commission, Sir Keir said it would undermine confidence in the probity of Parliament. There's been speculation that Mr Paterson, who resigned after a lobbying scandal, could be nominated by Downing Street. Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. At least 2 investigations are underway after at least 8 people were killed and dozens injured at a Travis Scott festival in Texas. The rapper says he's absolutely devastated following the stampede at his Astroworld music festival on Friday night. He was on stage at the event in Houston when the crowd surged forward, which police are calling a mass casualty incident.
My fans really mean the world to me, and I always just really want to leave them with a positive experience. And anytime I can make out, anything that's going on, I stop the show and, help them get the help they need, I could just never imagine the severity of the situation.
At least 19 people have been killed in a road traffic accident near Mexico City. A truck lost control and crashed at toll booths on the Mexico-Puebla highway in Ixtalapuca. 6 nearby vehicles were also dragged along. 3 people were injured. Iraq's Prime Minister Mustafa al-Khatimi has survived an assassination attempt after armed drones targeted his home. Security has been deployed in Baghdad's green zone after people heard an explosion and gunfire. The area houses many government buildings and foreign embassies. The attack comes amid tensions sparked by Iran-backed militias who are refusing to accept last month's parliamentary election results. In a statement broadcast on Iraqi national television, Mr. Khatimi called on everyone to take part in a peaceful dialogue for Iraq's future. National trust organisations worldwide are calling for a ban on the use of peat in compost as part of efforts to tackle climate change. The charity says healthy peatlands act as carbon sinks, which absorb carbon from the atmosphere. They help control flooding, reduce the impact of climate change and provide a home for wildlife. National Trust Director General Hilary McGrady says the government must step up and play their part. Tributes are being paid to UB40's founding member Astro, who has died following a short illness. The 64-year-old, whose real name is Terence Wilson, was a vocalist for the band, which originally formed in 1978 in Birmingham. The group sold more than 70 million records and produced hits for Red Red Wine, Falling in Love with You and Rat in My Kitchen. I'll have more in half an hour. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction, and I'm Nigel Farage. In the studio with me today is Paul Embry, and joining us from Northern Ireland is Arlene Foster. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and have some straightforward, honest and open debate. This is not just journalists talking to journalists. We want to get to the bottom of these issues. And don't forget, we want to know what you think right throughout these next 2 hours. Yet another Tory Sleaze row, this time cash in return for a seat in the House of Lords. Well, that's what the Sunday Times is leading with this morning. We'll take a look at whether we think there's any truth to those allegations. COVID vaccinations are due to be made compulsory for all NHS staff, but could this lead to a mass exodus of staff? We'll look at how the health service could be affected by this move. Plus, last Thursday, a record 853 people managed to cross the English Channel in one single day. And I wonder, given that we've just paid the first chunk of the 54 million to France, what on earth is going to come next? And anything you want to comment on, get involved in, then it's easy. Please email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. This is The Political Correction. Now, the Sunday Times leads today with a story, and it's one the Tory party just do not appear to be able to shake off. The headline reads, "New Tory Sleaze row as donors who pay $3 million get a seat in the House of Lords." Well, this, of course, comes hard on the heels of the interview we did here last Sunday with Owen Paterson. It was the only broadcast interview that Mr. Paterson did. I spoke to him at length. We debated afterwards what he'd said, and little did we know within 48 hours what this would turn into. Paul Embry, he talked, didn't he, about milk safety. This is what he pushed very, very hard. I did wonder later whether perhaps it was what he didn't say to us that was perhaps more relevant.
I think he was slightly economical with you last week. He gave the impression that it was simply about the exemption. He raised the issue of antibiotics in milk, and that was the exemption that allowed him to raise that on behalf of a company who were paying him money. In fact, when you read the report, it was quite a bit more than that, wasn't it? It was meeting with ministers, it was promoting the products and the technology of Randox, one of the companies.
Yeah, there was a blood product.
Yeah, and also with
well.
The other company he was being paid by, Lynn Country Foods, he lobbied ministers to try to put a competitor at a disadvantage in terms of food labelling. So, yeah, I think it was as much about what he didn't tell you as what he did tell you. I mean, I certainly think he had some legitimate concerns about the fact that, for example, he wasn't allowed to appeal I think it's a part of natural justice that if you suffer a sanction, having gone through that sort of process, you should be able to appeal, and he's not allowed to do that. But no, I mean, I ultimately, having looked at the report, I don't think the guy can have any complaints. I think he's pretty much bangs of rights, to be truthful.
And Arlene, we listened to Owen Paterson, and clearly, Downing Street listened to Owen Paterson as well. It was one of the quickest and most dramatic U-turns by a government. At one moment, they're going to get rid of the current procedure, the current disciplinary procedure, and 24 hours later, it's back to where we started. Arlene, do you think those headlines that scream Tory sleaze, does it actually stick? Because it's gone on, hasn't it already, way beyond Owen Paterson to what the Sunday Times are now saying about seats in the House of Lords.
Well, I think the story last week conflated two issues. There was the individual issue of Owen Paterson, and as you rightly said, he came on our show last week. He talked about the impact it was having on his family and all of the issues he had with the process. So there was that issue. And then there was the issue, which Paul has referred to, of the process itself, the system. Is it fit for purpose? Does it need to be reviewed? Is there a need to look at it again? Because, justice just doesn't need to be done. It needs to be seen to be done. And I think there's enough MPs now that are dissatisfied with the system. And if you don't have a system which is independent and fair in the eyes of those that are being adjudged by the system, then I think there is an issue. So I don't blame the government or Parliament for wanting to look at the system again. I think that is something that should be done. But I think what happened last week was they conflated that with an individual determination of the process. And then the two issues became embroiled. And we've seen some very angry scenes in the House of Commons. People were very cross about the fact that the two issues were being conflated. And actually, it got a bit unseemly when I was watching it live, and I noticed that some opposition MPs were actually scoffing at the death of Owen's wife, which I found really, really distasteful. I mean, there's more than one way to bring a House of Commons into disrepute. And frankly, scoffing at the death of someone was certainly not a good look for the House of Commons.
No, that's certainly true. Now, there is a sort of slight déjà vu feeling to all of this, because Tory sleaze was a big headline back in the 1990s. And there was one man who sticks in the memory, who arrived on the scene wearing a white suit, and his name was Martin Bell. And I'm very pleased to say that the former independent MP is with us this morning. Martin, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tory sleaze, it's all over the front pages, and it's now not just about Owen Paterson, it's about a succession of people who've given the Conservative Party £3 million, gone on to get treasurers' jobs, and now a rather large number of them seem to be sitting in the House of Lords. I just wonder, Martin, after you won that seat in Tatton against Neil Hamilton, and then in 2009, we had the MP's expenses story that came back. Has the problem with money, British politics and sleaze, has it ever really gone away?
It has not entirely gone away. It advances and retreats. But I have a feeling that what we saw last week is worse than what happened in the 1990s in this respect. I served for 3 years on the Standards Committee, and every single conclusion we came to, every penalty recommended was accepted on the floor of the House. What we never saw was a sitting government trying to block what we had decided, and I think that is new and rather alarming. I don't think they'll try it again. But I watched that vote on last Wednesday afternoon. I couldn't believe my eyes. I sometimes think, Nigel, that one of the lessons of history is that we don't learn the lessons of history.
Well, I'm sure that's true. And I suppose, in a way, is this perhaps what happens when a government's got a very big majority? Or is it a Conservative Party? Because, I've had my issues with the Conservative Party over the last few years in terms, for example, of expenditure on elections, by-elections, target general election seats. I mean, my impression This may be unfair, but my impression is there are some in the upper echelons of the Conservative Party who simply think they're above the law.
I think the problem becomes more acute when you have a government with a large majority. Whatever party it's of. During my time on the committee, there was a Labour government with a huge majority. And a whispering campaign then started up against the excellent independent Commissioner for Standards, Elizabeth Filkin. And if you remember, she was let go. And I think most of that whispering campaign, in my recollection, came from Labour MPs and friends of the accused. It's the way it works across both parties.
Martin, what can we do? I mean, clearly, the British public just don't like their members of Parliament having other sources of income, and particularly if they're company consultants. I mean, clearly, if you run a business and you get elected to Parliament, well, that's fine. You give the day-to-day management to somebody else and you might earn dividends. That's fine. But the idea of an MP becoming a consultant for a commercial company, I mean, if we got rid of that, would it help? Or would that be unfair of people that sit on the backbenches in the House of Commons?
No, I don't think it would be unfair. I think a tightening of the rules on lobbying is very much in order. There's nothing wrong with lobbying. I mean, it's part of politics, as you know. I used to lobby for the salt industry because I had a salt mine in the Chatham constituency, for the pharmaceutical industry because I was the MP for AstraZeneca. It's all right so long as no money changes hands. As soon as money changes hands, then that's corruption.
Yes. I mean, the word corruption, Keir Starmer used the word corruption quite openly this week, and it remains to be seen whether the Labour Party can capitalise on this in the way that Tony Blair did against John Major's government in the run-up to that 1997 general election. More broadly, Martin, have we reached a point, in your view, with the whole system of people being appointed to the House of Lords? Is it time we had major constitutional reform?
Yes, I used to raise this point many times. I thought it took only £1 million to buy a seat in the House of Lords, but you know what inflation is. Now it's 3 million. And I got up in the House one day and said, we might as well have a rate card, so much for an MB, so much for an OB, so much for a knighthood. There is a system. It has all the effectiveness of a chocolate fire guard. I think we have to revisit this and put something in place for the first time that really checks this peculiarly British form of corruption.
Yeah, and finally, Martin, it's been rumoured that you might be dusting off that white suit and having a crack at the by-election in North Shropshire. Is there any truth in this?
Nigel, I'm 83 years old and on a stick, and I think that the fact that he resigned his seat makes it much less compelling. But in extreme circumstances, demand extreme remedies. I think you should take a look at Leicester East. If Keith Vaz seeks to return to the House of Commons, then it might be worth looking at.
Interesting. Martin Bell, thank you very much indeed for coming on and joining us this morning. Well, we couldn't have had a better person, really, to come on and talk about this than Martin Bell, could we? Arlene, what did you make of what he had to say?
Well, he may be 83, but he's very clear, and it reminded me of the time that he stood in Tatton and took all of that on. I mean, I think, Nigel, we need a bit of perspective. I mean, not all people who go to the House of Lords, or not all people who are members of Parliament, are doing it for the wrong reasons. That we know very well that most people do it for the right reasons, and they want to bring forward issues for their constituents and for the good of the country, and that's what they do. But when some instances occur, then that's what causes the discussion that we're having here today. But, you know, Leicester East has been mentioned. We're not talking about Claudia Webb. We're not talking about the fact that she was convicted of harassment last week. There's no conversations about her being recalled or resigning her seat. And I think that's wrong. I think she should certainly be leaving the House of Commons, given what happened last week.
Yeah, as you say, that's been completely obscured. Paul, thoughts on what Martin Bell had to say?
Well, on the Claudia Webb thing, I have to say, even as a Labour person, I completely agree. I mean, what she did was appalling. She's been convicted. The honourable thing would be to step down and for there to be a by-election. I think if she clings on to her seat, I think that would be a very sad indictment.
Yes, I mean, for an MP to lose their seat, they have to be convicted for a year and a day.
Yeah, and
it's the old Victorian definition of a felony as opposed to a misdemeanor.
It's a strange one, but in terms of her seat, she's fallen just the right side of the line in terms of being able to stay there. But look, you know, people, and there may be a recall process that people demand that she stands down, but it's a matter of honour. You know, it was a pretty clear-cut case as far as I could see in terms of the court case. She was found to have engaged in the most atrocious behaviour, and I think that somebody who's an MP who is found guilty of that needs to fall on their sword. Whether she will remains to be seen, but she really ought to. But in terms of Martin's point, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, I find it difficult when you're a member of Parliament representing sometimes tens of thousands of constituents. How you have time for a second job anyway? I mean, it seems to me that the parliamentary process and constituency work is in itself a full-time job, and if it's being done properly, you ought to take up.
What is a full-time job?
Well, I would say being an MP is a full-time job.
How many hours a week?
Well, I think if you're doing your job diligently and properly and representing your constituents and meeting with your constituents and lobbying in Parliament on their behalf and taking an interest in the affairs of the nation, whether it's the economy or foreign policy or whatever, I would argue you probably have got a full-time job. And to see MPs, and I'm not saying they're not diligent, but to see MPs going out and being barristers and consultants, I think most of the public look at that and say, well, are you doing your first job properly?
The public feel very strongly about it. But of that, there's absolutely no doubt at all. I have to say what Martin Bell said about the fact that Owen Paterson will not be standing in this by-election, which he could have been, of course, had there been a recall petition triggered, as he said himself, makes it less compelling. And he's right. We'll see what happens. I have to say, from my own experience of dealing with the British establishment and fighting against the British establishment, I think the word corrupt is perfectly fair, perfectly reasonable. I think the Sunday Times story about £3 million, then working as a treasurer and then going to the House of Lords, I don't think the Sunday Times have even scratched the surface of this. This goes much, much deeper, and it isn't just about people giving money to political parties. Peerages are being used as a means of buying off political opponents, and that's what they tried to do to me in 2019. They literally came along and said, right, you as the Brexit party can have all of these peerages if you back Boris in the general election. It was the most corrupt, disgraceful thing I've seen in all my years in politics, and yet nobody at the time even seemed vaguely interested. If one good thing does come out of the Owen Paterson saga, perhaps a complete rethink of the whole system, because I really do believe that it is corrupt, and there are people in very top positions in this country who are able to act as if they're above the law and get away with it time and time again. Coming up, a major warning. Yes, Sir John Major says that suspending parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol would be colossally stupid. Well, this ex-Prime Minister just simply never, ever stops. It's going to be interesting in a moment to get Arlene's reaction.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Well, yesterday, the former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, launched a blistering attack on the current Prime Minister over the Owen Paterson affair in Parliament, which we were discussing earlier, calling the administration politically corrupt. But he then went on and returned to his favourite subject, Europe. He said that, and I quote, invoking Article 16 would be colossally stupid, and he said it would be absurd. And it led me to think that perhaps there was a coordinated attack in relation to the use of Article 16, because the Irish Prime Minister on Thursday told us that it would be irresponsible and unwise for the United Kingdom government to invoke Article 16. Then on Friday, we had the Vice President of the European Commission, Maros Sefcovic, telling us that there would be serious consequences if Article 16 was invoked by the UK government. And it did make me wonder who was coming next to tell us about Article 16 and the dire consequences. Of course, Article 16 is part of the protocol and was there to be used if necessary. And it makes you wonder why it was put in to the protocol at all, if it wasn't to be used. Of course, Sir John Major has come out on many occasions to talk about Northern Ireland and Europe, but he has yet to come out and talk about the fact that British citizens living here in Northern Ireland are subject to a different regime than the rest of the United Kingdom. He doesn't speak about that, but he does speak in favour of the European Union. Nigel, I'm sure you have some views on his intervention, which came yesterday as well, about Northern Ireland, and indeed his outburst in relation to the current Prime Minister and how he handled the Owen Paterson affair.
It's strange, Arlene, because he did for a few years, it seemed to me, to have sort of stopped being Prime Minister and gone back to normal life. And I sort of thought, well, this looks like a former Prime Minister who's, happy in his own skin and quite well balanced. And I think that was the case until the Brexit referendum came along. And the truth of it is that Major is a fanatical Europhile. He was, of course, the man that pushed through the Maastricht Treaty without a referendum in this country. And now he begins to look bitter, twisted, and clearly one of his main motivations against Boris Johnson is that Boris decided in the end to opt for the Brexit side of the debate, and John Major never, ever wants him to forget it. And I think it's reasonable that former Prime Ministers from time to time should speak out on issues about which they feel very strongly. But it seems with John Major, this is now becoming a regular habit. And I think with it, his own reputation and credibility start to decline. He's not quite yet in Ted Heath territory, which was the longest sulk in history. He couldn't bear Margaret Thatcher. But I do think John Major's in trouble. And as I say, starting to look somewhat bitter.
Well, yes, and Paul, this isn't the only story that's about, i.e. the protocol today. We've heard in the Sunday Telegraph today around the fact that the UK government is looking at drawing up plans for their own scientific programmes because the European Union have delayed their entry into Horizon 2020 and other scientific programmes, I think, and satellite programmes. We had actually opted into those programmes after Brexit, I think at a cost of £15 billion over 7 years. Overall, it's a £77 billion programme over those 7 years. But because the EU have delayed, and they're using it actually to get leverage in the Northern Ireland Protocol discussions, we're actually not going to be able to enter those schemes, which are very important actually for collaboration and for the science industry. I mean, this is we are getting the attention because we're drawing up new plans, but really this is Europe delaying our entry into these plans.
Yeah, and they're clearly using it as a bargaining chip. I think there's a certain amount of posturing going on. They're bringing in these scientific programmes as a way to try to win concessions from the UK on the protocol, and no doubt on other areas as well. I think both sides probably on this would stand to lose too much. So I think the EU is ramping it up, but whether they would go through with it in the final analysis, I doubt. But I think in terms of the protocol, it clearly isn't working. It needs to be looked at. Article 16 was there for a reason, and it said that where either side is experiencing societal or economic challenges, they're entitled to invoke it. And I think that is pretty clearly the case in Northern Ireland at the moment. So I don't think it would be unreasonable, certainly isn't unreasonable to talk about invoking Article 16, though of course it should be a last resort, and we should try to negotiate a suitable outcome if we can, which I think we will probably do. I think these things always go through the same routine, don't they? There's a lot of strong talk, there's a lot of hardball, there's a lot of eyeballing, as we saw with reaching a deal on the EU when we left in the first place. But in the end, I suspect both sides will realise that there's a deal to be struck there. I mean, it's the EU, I think, is clearly being zealous in terms of the border. I read the other day that 20% of all checks being carried out by the EU are on goods coming into Northern Ireland, which to me seems entirely disproportionate. And actually, if you look at the EU's eastern frontier, the checks coming in on goods on Northern Ireland outstrip in terms of numbers the checks that are taking place on the EU's eastern frontier. So I think on this, the government, the UK, has got a point, but I do think ultimately that both sides will realise it's not in their interest to have the UK pulling out of these programmes and for there to be no agreement going forward.
I'm going to take issue with both of you on this. I didn't campaign for Brexit for us to stay part of multi-billion EU programmes where, given my knowledge of how Brussels spends money, I'm absolutely certain we're not getting good value for money or bang for buck. Now, I know there are those in our universities who, of course, get some of this money and will scream blue murder at what I'm saying. We don't need Brussels to do science. You know, we can do science, we can cooperate with people all over the world to do science. We don't need to do it through EU programmes that will go on costing this country billions of pounds every year. So as far as I'm concerned, the sooner we're out of these things, the better. I was horrified when Mrs May came back and said we're going to stay in these programmes, and I was even more surprised when Boris's oven-ready deal, as he called it, continued to keep us stuck here. If we're going to spend billions of British taxpayers' money on scientific programmes and cooperation, good, let's not do it through Brussels organisations.
But cooperating with
and I suppose
is not a bad thing.
Yeah, Brussels will.
Cooperating with Europe is a good thing. Cooperating with European universities may be a good thing, but we don't need...
There will be joint interests sometimes.
But we don't need EU programmes. That's really the point that I'm making.
Sorry, Arlene.
Well, I think if we don't have the engagement with Horizon 2020, and you're right, the universities really do, and I think that's why we opted into those programmes, Nigel. But I think you're right around the fact that we have shown through COVID, I think, the brilliance of scientific advances in the UK, and the fact was the NHRA and organisations like that were able to stand on their own 2 feet and actually go ahead of Europe in terms of being freed from bureaucracy. But I do think it tells you something that the EU is prepared to use Horizon 2020, their flagship scientific programme, to try and stop any deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think that tells you all you need to know about where their priorities are. And it is really terrible. I mean, they are interfering in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, and not just people in Northern Ireland, but people right across the UK should be very, very concerned about that. Paul's right about the number of checks that are happening. And actually, it is completely disproportionate, and it isn't looking at the risk. I mean, what is the risk to the single market of goods coming across from GB into Northern Ireland to be sold in Northern Ireland? There is no risk. And the reality is this is about control, and the European Union are determined to keep that control over Northern Ireland because the Irish government have wanted for some time to have that there. And really, it needs to be sorted out. I take Paul's point about he hopes there will be a negotiated settlement. We all hope for that. But it's been going on all year, and it needs to come to an end at some stage. And I think David Frost has indicated that it's going to come to an end in November. And I very much welcome that to be the case.
Yeah, well, let's see, Arlene. I have to say, I do like David Frost. He stands up and says all the right things. But ultimately, what to do about Northern Ireland is going to be a big call for Boris Johnson at some point before too long. It really is. Coming up, cricket officials have said that other counties are also experiencing racism following the allegations and resignations at Yorkshire County Cricket Club. We'll look at how widespread this is next.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, there are nearly 1.4 million people that work for the National Health Service. It's a lot of people, and we're expecting a big announcement about COVID vaccinations being compulsory for each and every one of them. It's imminent. Now, some think this move is very heavy-handed and will lead some to quit the industry, as indeed we have seen in the care sector. But isn't it interesting? The government are not going to bring this in until April. So they kind of think they've got time to convince everybody to get the vaccine, and they'd be worried about staff walking out in the middle of the winter. But is this government taking things too far? Or is there real clinical need for everybody in the NHS to have the vaccine? Well, with us now to talk about this is Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School, Bharat Pankania. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
One quick question before we get into this and the ethics of this. Boris Johnson said 2 weeks ago that having the vaccine doesn't make you any less likely to either catch or transmit the virus. And I I listened to that very carefully. And I keep asking people the question. You know, I fully understand and I absolutely believe that if you've got the vaccine and you get ill with COVID, you know, your chances of being hospitalised or dying are vastly reduced. I get that. I understand that. But nobody seems to be able to give me a proper answer that if I've had the vaccine, as to whether I can still carry the virus and pass it on to anybody else, and whether having that vaccine makes that less likely.
Very happy to answer that, Nigel, and I will answer it fully, and hopefully you will now know. So if you have been fully immunized, your duration of infection is reduced. And whilst the duration of your infection is reduced, the duration of your infectivity, i.e. the period that you are infectious for, is also reduced. Therefore, with a fully immunized person, your chances of dying from the COVID disease are drastically reduced, one. Number two, your period of infectivity, were you to be infected, is reduced. Your infectiousness is also reduced.
Ah, OK. So your infectiousness is reduced, yeah? And we've got some really good evidence for that.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. So there was a lot of to and fro about fully immunized people being just as infectious and infectious for the prolonged period of time. We now have several studies which show that actually a fully immunized person is infectious for a shorter period, and therefore they're also less infectious because they are secreting fewer virus particles out. So it's not only because their infectiousness is shorter, they throw out fewer virus particles.
OK, thank you for that. Now, we've seen in the care home sector, in which this legislation is in place already, and we've seen 13,000 people just leave the care industry. There's still a big question mark over 20, 30,000, I understand, of people who work in the care sector who haven't yet had the vaccine. If those that don't want to take the vaccine is in the population about 12%, which I think is about the right number, and if we start talking about the National Health Service, I mean, you'd be talking about 150,000 people who would be out of work on the 1st of April. Is this policy, which, and I'm certain it is going to come in, and certainly the Health Secretary has signalled it, is saying to everybody that works for the NHS, including half of them who never meet patients because they work in offices, is this not a bit heavy-handed?
Well, of course, Nigel, it is. I'm with you. I agree with you. I've been a veteran of taking people with me with respect to vaccines and immunization. I hate forcing people to do things that they don't want to do. The job that has to be done is inform, educate, advise, take the people with you, and in sensitive areas. And in sensitive areas, you know, you're working on a oncology ward, people are severely immune suppressed, special care baby units, etc. We already ask our healthcare workers that they be fully immunized against several range of infectious diseases. What I am always against is forcing people to say you will be immunized, and then you lose your relationship with your healthcare worker.
Yeah, there is a danger of that, and sort of hard on the heels, Barrett, of that debate is the Mail on Sunday today majoring in quite a big way on their front page that ministers are drawing up plans to bring back tests and quarantine for those who refuse the third COVID jab, the booster jab, and yet want to travel. And I don't know. Even as the pandemic appears to be waning, it seems that government by diktat is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I just question the ethics of all of this, frankly.
Well, on Sky News today, I said, this is a smokescreen about focusing on boosters. Where you need to focus is the people who have not been immunized at all. They are the ones at greatest risk. the school's immunization program has been slow for both SARS-CoV-2 and seasonal influenza. That is where the problems are going to come from, and where you have person-to-person transmission of infection in crowded places. To then narrowly focus on, if you haven't been boosted, we are going to hold you in quarantine, is using a seriously large sledgehammer to crack a small nut.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I want to say thank you, Bharat Pankania, for joining us here on GB News this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is interesting, isn't it, Paul? As I said, the pandemic's on the wane, and yet government is telling us more and more and more what we have to do.
I think
maybe it's for our own good. Perhaps I've missed the point here.
Well, I think it's indicative of the mission creep that has existed since the start of the pandemic. Actually, we were originally told, you know, we need to squash the sombrero, was the phrase, wasn't it? And stay at home, protect the NHS, allow us to build capacity in the NHS. That doesn't seem to have happened particularly over the last 18 months. And then, you know, we'll get out of this, we'll repeal the Coronavirus Act, we'll be back to normal. Then it became the vaccines are the way out of this. And it strikes me that the vaccines have probably not been quite as effective as people suggested they would be. And I think when you look at the variants that we've had to deal with as well, that's probably had quite a significant impact. But at some point, I think the government has got to say, look, we've got to trust people to live their lives. Of course, we need to look after the most vulnerable. Yeah. It's critical we should do that, and we should throw whatever resources of the state at doing that. But at some point, we've got to say, look, we can't allow this thing to govern our lives forever. When you get into the area of vaccine passports and stuff, I'm deeply uncomfortable with it, and I think a lot of people are.
I know, and across the pond in America, even more remarkable, that, you know, youngsters have been given incentives, cash incentives, young children to have the jab. More of that on GB News during the week. But for now, the big row. Officials from Yorkshire Cricket Club have reportedly said that other counties are having the same problem with racism. Yorkshire County Cricket Club has faced allegations of racism and the handling of such cases in the last few days. Well, to fill us in with all of this, Aidan McGee, sports broadcaster and journalist. Aidan, this has just exploded as a story. For those that are not avid sports followers and watchers, just give us a quick brief on what's going on at Yorkshire County Cricket Club.
Well, Nigel, it hasn't really moved on much in the last 24 to 36 hours, but we must stress that this is probably the most unedifying episode in the history of Yorkshire County Cricket Club, probably more widely English cricket as well in recent years. And what's lifted it into the front page territory is the implications or the allegations made against Michael Vaughan. Michael Vaughan is an...
And just to be clear, this is a cricketer that played county cricket for Yorkshire called Azam Rafiq.
Absolutely.
And he was in the team.
10 years.
A regular in the Yorkshire team. And was reported to have been great pals with the rest of the team at one point in time.
Yeah, well, he actually made reference in one of his tweets, I was looking through this morning, that he actually said that he tried to fit in with the culture within the club, and he regrets doing that. So it leads you to the question later on, why has he suddenly backtracked and said that he's been a victim of all this kind of racism? I mean, 10 years he was there, a highly celebrated figure, described as a very talented spin bowler. But as I say, it's the Michael Vaughan element, it's the Gary Balance element that lifts it to the front page. Michael Vaughan is... He was the captain when England ended their 18-year drought for the Ashes. He's an officer of the British... Absolutely, officer of the British Empire. He denies anything... he denies any wrongdoing, but he's also been dropped by the BBC for the show that he does with Phil Tufnell tomorrow evening. So that's what's lifted it into a different stratosphere in terms of the story. Some of the other names mentioned are not necessarily known to English cricket fans, but there have also now been allegations as well that it's going on at other clubs. This is Yorkshire deflecting blame, I don't know. They've suffered commercially for this, there's no question about it. Tetley Bitter have pulled out their sponsorship, as have Yorkshire Tea. And then, of course, there's the DCMS Select Committee hearing on November the 16th, and there's going to be plenty going on in that's for sure.
And Headingley, the home of Yorkshire cricket, has been told it can't have England games, it can't have test matches. I mean, it's escalated incredibly quickly. The biggest criticism is that the club committee itself didn't act. Their defence of this was they took what was being said in the locker room to be banter, as opposed to...
Never a good word to use, is it?
Well, OK, there is a difference, isn't there, between Mickey taking and bullying. There is a difference between banter and outright racism. But where do we go with this? I mean, you know, it may well be that all the allegations that have been made are correct. It may well be this individual was subjected to horrible racist language and bullying. All of that may be true. But what do you do with cricket teams, football teams, hockey teams, rugby teams? There's always going to be joshing going on in changing rooms, isn't there?
Well, there is. One thing I would say, Nigel, as well, that quite a lot of this is historical. It was done at a different time, and we're going back to Azim Rafiq started playing in 2008. Yes, I appreciate it's not hundreds of years ago, but I do think the climate was slightly different now. Whether it's less likely to happen now, well, we don't know. We can't necessarily take that for granted. But what will be interesting in the DCMS Select Committee hearing, Nigel, is that those participants, and there will be many who have been called to account and quizzed by MPs, they're protected by parliamentary privilege, and they'll be almost immune from any kind of significant prosecution because they're in the select committee environment. So you will hear people being a bit loose-lipped. There will be people coming forward. You will hear stuff that we weren't necessarily expecting. I think some of us will be surprised by what comes out.
Now, Paul Embry, you're a big sports fan, a watcher of sport, and you love playing sports. You know what it's like. And I'm not defending anything, and I'm saying it may well be that all the charges... I mean, everyone gets ribbed, don't they, in a locker room? Everyone gets ribbed. I don't know. What do you think about this? I mean, is this going to bring cricket down, or has this gone too far? What do you make of it?
I mean, first of all, I think it's a terrible mess, and I think the whole thing is very, very sad because Yorkshire County Cricket Club is, in many respects, a national institution, not just a Yorkshire institution.
They've won more county titles than anybody else, haven't they?
Exactly. It's an old, historic, very proud club with a great history and a great tradition, and to see it in this situation with the kind of vultures circling now, and as you said, they've been told that they can't host England games and sponsors have pulled out, and you wonder where this is going to end up. And it's difficult in many respects, I think, to make a substantive judgment on it because we've only really had snippets of the report. We've had allegations through the media. No one really outside of a tight-knit circle has been able to really look at the report in any detail. Now, my view is, look, clearly, if there is racist abuse going on at any sporting institution, anywhere in society, in a workplace or whatever, that needs to be challenged, it needs to be called out. Where disciplinary action is appropriate, then we need to take disciplinary action. And perhaps Yorkshire, in the way it handled it, didn't take things seriously enough. But I hope the situation can be resolved because it is quite painful to watch a club such as Yorkshire go through this sad situation.
I think Michael Vaughan and Gary Ballance possibly did themselves a little bit of a favour by kind of preempting the storm and saying that they were two of the players implicated. Michael Vaughan strenuously denied, we should say as well, that the allegations against him, but then another player who was party to the conversation which happened some years ago claimed that he definitely saw it. So this should come out in the DCMS committee. It all hinges on that.
Should Yorkshire just publish the report?
Well, I think it doesn't look good.
They're going to have to, aren't they?
Well, I think they'll have to. And they haven't done any favours, Nigel, by not releasing it now. They're obviously worried about something. And I don't think they're going to be able to get away with that with the Select Committee because it's all going to come out in that.
Yes, it will. And, you know, the story actually that we've kind of picked up is that everyone's involved. It's as if Rafiq feels or is saying the whole team were against him.
Let's not forget, I mean, he was made captain of the team as well. So, I mean, in terms of the allegation that Yorkshire County Cricket Club is institutionally racist, I don't necessarily think that holds. He was made captain of the team. They re-signed him, as well as I understand it, after a knee injury. So that doesn't suggest to me we're talking about an institution that's necessarily racist. But, you know, I think they do need to be more open in terms of the report, whether publishing it full or publishing a précis of it, so people can get a handle on what has gone on and then see if the club has reacted appropriately.
I don't think they'll be able to recover their credibility in the commercial sense unless they publish that support. I don't think the likes of Tetley Bitter and Yorkshire Tea, big sponsors who've been involved with the club for a great many years now, are going to step back into the breach and resume their sponsorship unless Yorkshire County Cricket Club admits its mistakes, and by extension, that means publishing the report.
I think it does too. Aidan, what else is going on in the world of sport this weekend?
It was interesting. Yesterday we saw Manchester United lose at home again to Manchester City. More question marks over Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. We saw the situation yesterday where Gary Neville and Roy Keane in the studio, analysing the game, blaming it all on the players, not necessarily blaming their mate who happens to be the manager of Manchester United. So big few weeks for them. They thought they'd weather the storm by beating Tottenham last week, and they had a decent result in the Champions League in midweek. We had Norwich City as well. They won their first game in 20 attempts in the Premier League, stretching back to the end of 2019-20 season. Their manager was sacked after finally winning a game last night. So
that was bizarre.
It was. I think they decided
Norwich are not
beforehand.
used to winning. They were just completely nonplussed by it, weren't they?
I think they decided beforehand they were going to do it. I mean, in reality, it was 2 points out of a possible 30 from the opening start of the season. They had spent quite big on players in the summer, unproven Premier League players. I wouldn't say he's been hung out to dry. He's had some great moments there, record points totals. He had 2 promotions, and they've garnered a great deal of money there. The problem was back in the summer. I mean, they sold Emi Buendia to Aston Villa. They're probably their top player. He's fallen out with, it seems, Todd Cantwell as well. These are players who make the difference when you're fighting at the bottom of the table, as you've known in recent years with Crystal Palace. Sorry to mention that.
Oh, hang on. They won again yesterday.
They did very well.
They won again yesterday.
They did very well.
They've had a good couple of weeks.
They did, exactly, yeah. And QPR got a 1-1 draw at Blackpool as well. We should drop that in.
But at least football not marred in controversy in the way that cricket is right now, are thanks to Aidan McGee, sports broadcaster and journalist. Arlene, I don't know whether you're a keen sports follower or not, but this whole question of banter between people in locker rooms and playing together in sports teams, and at what point does that cross the line and become racism or sexism or bullying? It's not necessarily straightforward, is it?
All of this does very much concern me. I obviously don't play rugby myself. I'm not built for that sport, but my boys play rugby. My husband played rugby. So I've been around rugby for a very long time. And it just does worry me that we get into the circumstance where changing rooms, locker rooms, call it what you will, become sterile environment. And it takes the fun out of actually being part of a team, ribbing each other. Of course, racism, sexism, all of those things have to be challenged, and you can't have somebody feeling uncomfortable in a team. You want them to be part of a team. That's what being in a team is all about, having that camaraderie and going out and facing the opposition. But there also does need to be fun when you're part of a team, and you need to be able to have joust with your friends and to have that all going on. So this does concern me a little bit, that because whenever we discuss any of these big issues, Nigel, the pendulum goes one way and then goes completely in the other direction. Yeah. And you don't want to take the enjoyment out of sport. You don't want to take the fun out of sport. And I think that is really important to keep in sport.
Well, in my experience, the worst thing about team games is not what your fellow players say to you, it's when they don't talk to you at all, because you dropped a catch that was a complete sitter, or you scored an own goal and silence.
That's happened to you a lot, has it?
Oh, I mean, you see it, it's up there. Yeah, it is the most awful. You've let the whole lot down.
Because you've got a cigarette in your hand. That's why you're trying to catch it.
Could be, but you've let everyone down and no one wants to talk to you. Before we go to the break, just going to get some of your views, which of course are flooding in as they always do. Mel asks, are migrants now using planes to get into the EU, declaring a medical emergency to get permission to land and making a run for it once landed? With the onset of winter, the Channel... Well, I tell you what, Mel, we're going to come to the Channel a little bit later on in this programme, because 853 people crossed the Channel on Thursday, following on from 454 the day before. Barbara tells us the government is useless. Sleaze, lies, immigration, green, all things we didn't vote for. Well, Barbara, I think this is one of the problems that Boris Johnson has got at COP26. And with the sheer emphasis he's putting on net zero, is people who voted Conservative in 2019 did not realise this was that kind of priority. So, look, it's I'm not saying any of this is easy, but Mark says, democracy is dying and all political parties have a huge problem of trust. Once again, I call for the House of Lords to be abolished. I'm with you, Mark. It can't go on as it is. And maybe time for all parties to have a taxpayer's allowance of $1 million for election use only, with no input from private donors at any time. Mark, here's the problem. If you take private money out of politics, it becomes state money in politics. It becomes taxpayers' money in politics. And if Taxpayers' money funds politics. Taxpayers' money can also decide who is suitable to stand for election and not for election. And I certainly wouldn't support that.
And if at the end of the day, if you're a political party campaigning for government, you've got to be able to win people to your ideas. You shouldn't be able to succeed or establish yourself as a political party just because you've taken money from the taxpayer. You should do it on the basis of what you're campaigning for.
I agree.
And I would have, as a Labour Party person, I'd have real problems with state funding in terms of the impacts on the relationship with the trade union movement. The Labour Party born out of the bowels of the trade union movement. That's who our core base is. So I'm very uneasy at any suggestion. Of taxpayer funding of parties.
I'd like us to think that if you gave 50 quid to a political party, you get tax relief on it. Maybe that's a way of getting ordinary folk involved and not mega donors who might or might not be seeking seats in the House of Lords. Coming up in the next hour, we'll return to the top story on Tory Sleaze, which is leading the way with the Sunday Times today. Plus, Paul has a worrying story about surveillance of home workers. It's on the rise, so please don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. Coming up on the political correction, if you've just joined us, we're talking, well, of course, Tory Sleaze after the Sunday Times suggest a cash for honours scandal. Paul Embry is here with a story about adult bosses spying on workers, people working from home, yet they're being looked at the whole time. Arlene Foster joins us from Northern Ireland, where Sir John Major is sticking his nose into the row over the protocol. That's plenty more coming, but first, the latest news headlines.
I'm Amelia Harper. This is your news at 11 o'clock. The Health Secretary is urging the elderly and vulnerable to get their coronavirus booster jabs to help avoid COVID restrictions over Christmas. Sajid Javid says young people can play their part by persuading their parents and grandparents to get the vaccine. So far, almost 10 million people have received a top-up jab, but in England, around 30% of over 80s and 40% of over 50s are yet to receive it. From tomorrow, 3 million more people are being invited in England to have their booster. Sir Keir Starmer says he doubts Boris Johnson can help clean up politics. The Labour leader has also warned making MP Owen Paterson a peer. He says it would undermine confidence in Parliament. There has been speculation Mr Paterson, who resigned after a lobbying scandal, could be nominated by Downing Street. The Sun on Sunday's political editor David Wooding has told GB News he thinks this won't affect Boris Johnson's popularity.
Still sails on ahead, partly down to the fact that Sir Keir Starmer isn't cutting through as well as he would like, but also because Boris Johnson seems to have a bit of a Teflon finish, and people factor in that Boris is Boris, and they like him and they vote for him on the basis of he's an attractive politician for some reason. He has an X factor, and whatever mud is thrown at him doesn't seem to stick.
The US is reopening its borders to UK visitors who are fully vaccinated against COVID tomorrow. The country has been closed since early 2020 due to the pandemic. Travellers from Ireland and the 26 Schengen nations in Europe, China, India and South Africa are among those also allowed in on Monday. Travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin has told GB News this is a huge boost for the UK travel sector.
The fact that the USA is opening up really is a step towards the world unlocking. I mean, obviously, it affects many citizens from other countries who are fully vaccinated who can also enter the USA. But the UK accounts for the most arrivals into the United States every year. Before the pandemic, it was 4.8 million. We are their top market.
Now, there are some flashing images in this next story. At least 2 investigations are underway after at least 8 people were killed and dozens injured at a Travis Scott festival in Texas. The rapper says he's absolutely devastated following the stampede at his Astroworld music festival in Houston on Friday. He was on stage when the crowd surged forward, which police are calling a mass casualty incident.
My fans really mean the world to me, and I always just really want to leave them with a positive experience. And anytime I can make out, anything that's going on, I stop the show and, help them get the help they need, I could just never imagine the severity of the situation.
At least 19 people have been killed in a road accident near Mexico City. A truck lost control and crashed at a toll booth on the Mexico-Puebla highway in Ixtalapuca. 6 nearby vehicles were dragged along and 3 other people were also injured. Iraq's Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi has survived an assassination attempt after armed drones targeted his home. Security has been sent out in Baghdad's Green Zone after people heard an explosion and gunfire. The area houses many government buildings and foreign embassies. The attack comes amid tensions sparked by Iran-backed militias who are refusing to accept last month's parliamentary election results. National trust organisations worldwide are calling for a ban on the use of peat in compost as part of efforts to tackle climate change. The charity says healthy peatlands acts as carbon sinks, which absorb carbon from the atmosphere. They help control flooding, reduce the impact of climate change and provide a home for wildlife. National Trust Director General Hilary McGrady says the government must step up and play their part. Tributes are being paid to UB40's founding member Astro, who has died following a short illness. The 64-year-old, whose real name is Terence Wilson, was a vocalist for the band, which originally formed in 1978 in Birmingham. The group sold more than 70 million records and produced hits including Red Red Wine, Falling in Love with You and Rat in My Kitchen. You're right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines in half an hour. For now, let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction, and I'm Nigel Farage. Joining me in the studio today is Paul Embury, and joining us at home from Northern Ireland is Arlene Foster. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you back in charge. It isn't just journalists talking to journalists. We want to know what you think. right throughout all of this. Yet another Tory sleaze row. It's almost sort of slightly déjà vu-y, really, all of this, isn't it? This time, a Sunday Times lead with a big story suggesting that if you give the Conservative Party a total of £3 million, act as a treasurer for the party, you will go to the House of Lords, and they give a list of half a dozen people who've been pretty much through that route. COP26 enters its second week. The climate summit in Glasgow has seen world leaders and Hollywood actors jetting in, yes, 400 private jets. Is it all actually going to be worth it? Plus, a record 853 people crossed the English Channel in a single day this week. Well, how many more will come before any action at all is taken? And we're going to talk about that in a few moments' time. Please give us your thoughts, give us your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet using the hashtag @GBNews. This is The Political Correction. So the Sunday Times leads with this story today. It's their big front page splash, and it's something that just doesn't go away. New Tory sleaze row as donors who pay £3 million get a seat in the House of Lords. Now, in the last hour, we had Martin Bell, the man with the white suit, and he came on and joined us, and I did love his throwaway comment. He said, I thought seats in the House of Lords were a lot cheaper than £3 million. Let's see what Martin Bell said to us this time an hour ago.
It's all right so long as no money changes hands. As soon as money changes hands, then that's corruption.
Yes, I mean, the word corruption, Keir Starmer used the word corruption quite openly this week, and it remains to be seen whether the Labour Party can capitalise on this in the way that Tony Blair did against John Major's government in the run-up to that 1997 general election. More broadly, Martin, have we reached a point, in your view, with the whole system of people being appointed to the House of Lords? Is it time we had major constitutional reform?
Yes, I used to raise this point many times. I thought it took only £1 million to buy a seat in the House of Lords, but you know what inflation is. Now it's £3 million, and I got up in the House one day, so we might as well have a rate card, so much for an MB, so much for an OB, so much for a knighthood. There is a system. It has all the effectiveness of a chocolate fire guard. I think we have to revisit this and put something in place for the first time that really checks this peculiarly British form of corruption.
Yeah, and finally, Martin, it's been rumoured that you might be dusting off that white suit and having a crack at the by-election in North Shropshire. Is there any truth in this?
Nigel, I'm 83 years old and on a stick, and I think that the fact that he resigned his seat makes it much less compelling. But in extreme circumstances demand extreme remedies. I think you should take a look at Leicester East. If Keith Vaz seeks to return to the House of Commons, then it might be worth looking at.
There you are. It might be worth looking at, said 83-year-old Martin Bell, and I thought that was rather interesting. Arlene, more thoughts on Tory sleaze. Is that phrase, is it just here for this weekend, or is it back? Is it going to stick?
No, I think it will stick certainly for a while, and I think that the Prime Minister should be concerned about it. It doesn't help when people who were involved back in 1992, 93, and talking, of course, about Sir John Major, comes in and says that Boris's government is, I think he used the word politically corrupt. I mean, that is quite credible coming from Sir John Major, who is from the same political party as the Prime Minister. So I think this one will run for some time. But as I said earlier in the programme, Nigel, it is wrong that we just talk about the Tories in this context, because, of course, we have a Labour MP convicted of a campaign of harassment against a love rival. She's given a suspended sentence, and she's still a Member of Parliament. So I think we do need to talk about that as well, and not just about the Conservative Party.
Yeah, and Paul Embry, obviously you're going to say what you're going to say about this Conservative government, but of course it's not that long ago, is it, that we had a cash for honour scandal when Tony Blair was Prime Minister?
No, and, you know, I don't think these things are necessarily party political. You look back, most governments in history have had their episodes of sleaze. Labour, maybe not as much as Tories, but Labour have certainly...
of course not.
Labour have certainly had theirs in the past. I think the thing here is the Tories were absolutely hammered for this stuff in the 1990s. You know, we had the Cash for Questions, Neil Hamilton, the Al Fayed scandal, etc. I think the difference there is Labour at the time was a serious functioning opposition and was able to hold the government to account, was able to put the government under pressure. People saw the Labour Party in the 1990s as a serious alternative for government. The difficulty now, frankly, is that Labour is not presenting itself as a serious alternative to government. It is not holding this government to account in the way that it ought to be doing as an opposition. So there's a whole sense about the whole thing. Look, the government's getting away with this stuff. The government's getting away with murder. And I think the danger then is you end up in a situation where people just start abstaining in elections because they think the governing party is just filled with sleaze. We haven't got a serious opposition party. They're all as bad as each other. What's the point? And that's a real danger for our democracy.
Paul, I am convinced if there was a general election next Thursday, the turnout would be millions lower than it was in 2019. And I think that's sort of where we are. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about migrant crossings, a subject that raises the temperature of debate. But before we do that, Paul, a story that's caught your eye this week.
Yeah, this is a story from the Prospect Trade Union, which is very much the trade union for professional and technical workers, really. And they commissioned some polling, which I think gave some really interesting findings, particularly in light of the pandemic and what's happening in the workplace as we come out of it. And the polling found that 1 in 3 workers are now monitored by a camera in the workplace, which is up from 1 in 4 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And probably more interestingly, 13% of home workers, so people working remotely for their company, are also being monitored by
through the laptop,
cameras, through the laptop, through a webcam or some facility like that, which is up from 5% 6 months ago, so has nearly trebled. Now, Prospect, I think quite reasonably, is calling for a ban on webcams monitoring people at home, and I think the argument here is that homes are often people's sanctuaries from work. Now, we know, as a result of the situation that we've been in for the last 18 months, many people have effectively had to turn their homes into workplaces. And I think most people have gone along with that and said, needs must. It's not unreasonable that my employer is asking me to do that. But if the employer then says, OK, you're now going to be working from home more often, and by the way, we're going to train a webcam into your study or your dining room, wherever it is you're doing your work. And there's stories that Prospects have discovered that in some cases, you have bosses sitting in front of whole screens of workers who are sitting there, and he or she is able to see them and what they're up to on their webcam. So I think this has all implications, serious implications, first of all, for personal liberty and the fact that people are sitting in their own private abode. But secondly, for the fact that many people want their home to be, as I say, a haven from their workplace.
I've got a solution. Go back to the office.
Well, I mean, I suspect, to be blunt, that a lot of workers who currently are being told that they have to work remotely wouldn't actually mind going back to the office. I think there's probably some who are happy to stay at home. But look, either way, whether it's the choice of the worker himself or herself or the employer who's saying, you have to work from home, I think all of us should be uncomfortable about the idea that an employer can train cameras into your private home to make sure you're sitting there and you're doing your work. That has all sorts of implications. The law doesn't really cover it, I don't think, arguably because we've never really been confronted with this number of remote workers before. But now we know that people are working remotely in these numbers. I think there's no choice really but politicians and perhaps the Information Commission is to say, look, we need to upgrade the law to make sure that employers can't exploit people here.
I think we're the most surveilled country, certainly in the Western world, and driving up these smart motorways now, well, it isn't just about the hard shoulder going, but digital motorways. The big sign I saw on the M4 the other day proudly telling us that we will be monitored and filmed every moment we're on the road. So wherever we go, we're being monitored. But if you're employing people with your own money, and during lockdown they were forced to work from home, you can kind of understand why they want to make sure that people were actually working in that particular circumstance.
I mean, it's certainly not unreasonable, I don't think, for an employer to want to have that assurance that their employees are working. I mean, that's reasonable, I think, for an employer in any circumstances.
Yeah.
But there has to be a limit to these things. Otherwise, where does it end? I mean, it's one thing, I think, saying, look, you know, we have to have cameras in the workplace for security reasons and whatever. As long as the staff are fully consulted on that, they're through their trade union, ideally, are able to raise their concerns. But look, homes are people's personal private property, and if for reasons beyond their own control they're told you now have to work from home, that doesn't, in my view, automatically give the employer the right to say, oh, and by the way, we're going to train a camera into your home. For me, a home is off limits. It's one thing taking a call there.
Yeah.
It's one thing having a meeting by Zoom there. It's another thing someone pointing a camera at you.
Well, one person who is at home this morning is Arlene. We're filming you at home this morning, Arlene.
With her consent.
Yes. Yes, with her consent.
I've invited you in by consent to be with me in my own home. But I mean, I do agree with Paul. I think homes are safe places, and having cameras trained on people's homes. I have this vision, Paul, of somebody sitting behind a desk with a bank of computers in front of them, with everybody's home on the computer. I mean, it is really quite wrong to think in that way. However, if people are working from home, employers do need to know that they are actually working. And so there are other ways to do that, of course. By monitoring, are they logged onto their computer? Are they sending email? You know, there are ways to do that without actually having a camera trained on a person's home without their consent. As I say, I invite you in most Sunday mornings to my home, but I do take the point that it is wrong to have a camera trained on people's homes, certainly without their consent. And there are other ways to monitor that people are working. Of course, the best thing to do is to go back to work if you possibly can. And I know that most people do want to get back to work because their homes is a place where they come home, they rest, they enjoy family time, as opposed to having to work there all the time. And I think for most people, they like to go out to work and then come home to have a place of sanctuary.
Well, at the heart of all of this is the big debate over productivity. People saying, oh, I'm so much more productive at home. I don't believe a word of it because, you know, the pet's ill or the kids are late home from school or, you know, there's a knock at the door, it's Amazon with a parcel. I don't believe a word of it. We will come back to this issue, I have no doubt. But coming up, we look at the record numbers of crossings by migrants this week. 853 people made that journey on Thursday. 454 people made that journey on Wednesday. How many more need to cross before something happens? Oh, and interestingly, did you know the French have just drawn down the first chunk of Priti Patel's 54 million? Yes, it's true. Back in a moment.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories, with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
The Home Office confirmed that the UK authorities had rescued or intercepted 853 people from 25 incidents earlier on this week. That makes a new daily record. Now, look, if you want to find out what's going on in the English Channel, there's only one station to watch, and it's GB News. We were talking about this on the first big day this week when 454 came. And the next day, I held up in the evening all the daily newspapers, barely any mention at all. And then the next day, I had live in the studio with me Mark White, GB News' home and security editor. And Mark, we predicted 800 that day. We were pretty much bang on, weren't we?
Yeah, it took a couple of days though for the Home Office to release those figures. I was actually on Arlene's show on Friday just after the figures were released, and we broke that on air, talking about the fact it wasn't just the more than 850, Nigel, that crossed the channel on Wednesday of this week, Tuesday night into Wednesday, but it was on the very same day 779 who got into difficulties on the French side of the channel and had to be rescued in a massive air and sea rescue operation that took place on the French side of the channel. We know that some migrants lost their lives there. It was a very significant day and some real questions, I think, for French authorities, because the truth of it is, although we question so often the Home Office and their tactics, once these boats are in the water and they're heading towards the UK, well, once they get into UK waters, we can do nothing but comply with the law of the sea and pick them up and take them to the UK. This turn-back tactic that they're talking about, Nigel, is only going to work in a very, very small number of cases. So they're getting off the beaches in the first place. That is where they need to be stopped. And when you think of that single day of the 850 odd in UK waters, 779 being rescued in French waters, that's more than 1,600 people who've left French beaches all around Calais, Dunkirk, and that area. That you can't do that in a sort of clandestine way. That is, you know, something that surely the authorities patrolling those beaches would pick up on fairly quickly.
Yeah, and we're giving money, and as I said before the break, the first tranche of the latest £54 million has been drawn down upon. Mark, I've been calling this for a very long time, as you know. You know, right from the beginning of the pandemic, and I said back in the spring of this year that it would be 20,000 this year, but it could even be 30,000, and that's where we're headed. I think next year there's a real possibility this could turn into something rather like the Mediterranean. And I don't know whether you picked up the comment, but a French official for the Pas-de-Calais region involved with transport said on Friday morning an incalculable number of migrants are now reaching the Calais-Dunkirk area. What is the government going to do, Mark, or is this just going to deteriorate further?
Well, in terms of the French government, there is some real concern and some real friction, Nigel, that you picked up on there between the local officials in that area of northwest France and the government in Paris, because what's happening at the moment, very much against what local officials want, is that they're now building shelters because they've had this, to quote the local official, as you say, incalculable number of migrants who've come across, and they're building shelters in Calais itself to stop them sleeping on the streets, underpasses in the what was the jungle in those kind of wooded areas around Calais itself. The same is happening in Dunkirk and elsewhere along that coastline. And that, as I say, is something that the local officials are not at all happy about. They feel that that's going to act as more of a draw, but it's difficult to see how it can be more of a draw. There are thousands who are arriving there now with a view to getting over because they know it's a tactic that works. The people traffickers don't even need to tell them. They just need to look at the news and they can see the daily arrivals in Dover.
Yep, not one single deportation thus far this year. And the pull factors are still there, aren't they? The pull factors of accommodation, of dental care, of health care, of 3 square meals a day and £38 a week spending money. Mark, politically, I suppose it sort of suits Boris Johnson to leave Priti Patel as Home Secretary, and she takes the blame for all of it at some point.
Well, certainly, yes. While she's in office there, she is effectively the official who is going to take the brunt of the criticism. But remember as well, this tactic that she wants to introduce is a tactic that could prove very controversial. They're only going to use it in a very small number of cases, we understand this, pushback tactics where they're going to get officers on jet skis, and I know you got hold of footage not that long ago, Nigel, that showed them actually practicing for this tactic. Well, very soon, maybe not in these winter months, but they are going to use that in earnest. And the real concern is, and it will be difficult for Priti Patel if something happens in the way of a tragedy, but it will be very difficult for the individual commanding officer, the skipper at sea, who has to make that tactical decision. That rests with them, not really Priti Patel at the end of the day. And they will, you know, you can imagine they are going to be very reluctant to use this for fear that these boats, which are flimsy at the best of times, absolutely packed out, are going to run into difficulties, capsize, or God forbid the migrants on board threaten to jump in the water and do that anyway, and it becomes a very significant tragedy. It seems unsolvable, it really does, at the moment, unless you actually make some inroads into the people trafficking operation.
Mark White, thank you very much indeed. All I would add there is Australia managed to stop it, and they literally took the boats and towed them back to Indonesia to international condemnation, but the boats stopped coming. Now, I've looked at the shipping forecast, Paul, for this week, and we've got 3 or 4 very calm days coming. So I expect another couple of thousand come this week, and we're filling up hotels all over the country. We're filling up private accommodation. I think the public are quite angry about this.
I think they are, and not unreasonably. I think there is a difference. I've always argued there's a difference between genuine refugees and economic migrants. It strikes me that the vast majority of people coming from France fall into the latter category. Doesn't mean we shouldn't treat them as human beings, of course, but there's clearly a distinction between people who are fleeing a war-torn country and are in desperate need of immediate help, and people who have made a conscious decision to come from, in this case, a country such as France, which is arguably one of the most civilised countries on the planet. So I think the public do spot that and are very uneasy about it. I think they think the whole processing system has to be much more efficient. You know, people often languish here and they're not put through the system properly, and the number of people who have been sent back because their claims were determined not to be proper and just. It just doesn't seem to be happening. Clearly, we need to disincentivise people from making the journey in the first place, because, not least because it's a danger to them, actually, if they're coming across in the numbers that they are. Whether you do that through some sort of offshoring processing system, turning the boats back, I think we should only do that as a last resort, and if we're absolutely confident it's not going to result in loss of life or injury. But what is very clear, I think, is that the current situation is completely unsustainable, and there's a disconnect between what the politicians are saying or not saying and what the public are saying.
Arlene, it's completely out of control. I think on the current course, with all the pull factors still in place, with zero deportations, with the French, well, taking not much more than a casual interest in stopping these boats, it seems to me. Perhaps that's unfair. Maybe next year's 50,000 or 60,000. What do we do?
Well, I remember thinking when you made the assessment of how many people you thought were going to be coming across, I thought, surely not. And actually, it looks like it's going to be more. And that is really very concerning and very worrying. I think we should be looking at how others deal with this issue. And you rightly mentioned the Australians. We should be engaging with them. They are a Commonwealth country. They are one of our allies. We should be engaging with them to find out how we can work with them, because, of course, Indonesia is further away from Australia than France is from the south coast of England. So what is it we can be doing to deal with this matter? And I do think we really need to deal with the criminal gangs. When Mark was on with me on Friday, we spent some time talking about how much money was being made by these criminal gangs and how we could deal with that. I do think that there needs to be a tougher approach taken, because these people are just profiteering of others' misery. They're getting £5,000, £10,000 for each of these unfortunate people. Probably their life savings, whatever way they get that money, they're left them with nothing, and they are so vulnerable, and they're left vulnerable to these criminal gangs. And therefore, we do need to see a much tougher approach to the gangs that are assisting these people to come across in tiny little boats at great risk to their own lives, and I think it needs to be tackled.
Well, there are prosecutions of those involved with these gangs, but the problem is, on a very calm week, there are millions of euros at stake, and you can imprison them for as long as you like, but sadly, more will take their place. COP26, it's not quite the story it was at the beginning of this week, but it's still pretty important. 100,000 people marched in Glasgow yesterday to demand more action from governments, more action from COP, much along the same lines as Greta Thunberg the other day, who has now sunk into foul-mouthed abuse, which is rather sad. Our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is in Glasgow and has sent us this report.
Well, what a week it has been at COP26. More than 90% of countries by GDP signing up to net zero by the middle of this century. Countries representing 88% of the world's forests signing up to reverse deforestation by the end of this decade. Indeed, pledges on methane, reducing that by 30% across a whole host of countries by the end of this decade as well. Not only deforestation, but ocean conservation. 30% of the world's oceans committed to conservation now. Much has been achieved at this COP, yet for some people, that's simply not enough. We're here currently at a big protest in the middle of Glasgow, where people have gathered to protest COP, to say it's blah, 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 to protest the actions and the committals to net zero. I've been speaking to people who say that even if the entire world reached net zero tomorrow, it wouldn't be enough, because they don't want just net zero, they want 0, 0, 0. I've spoken to people here who want no growth, who want to end the capitalist system. I've spoken to some people here who want Cuba to have their embargo lifted by the US, others who want to deliver a socialist world economy, and some others who want an independent Scotland. It seems like quite a few causes have been muddled up and mixed in to this protest, but then that's the nature of these things. The curiosity here, the curious thing, is that there are ecological and environmental protesters protesting the conference of their dreams. It's unimaginable 10 years ago that you'd have all of these countries committing to eliminating carbon from their economies on a net basis. It's unimaginable that we would have heard these pledges and all this cash going to developing countries to get ready for a net zero transition. It's unimaginable that the leaders of the biggest businesses in the world would be getting on board with that net zero agenda too. All of that's been happening down the road, and yet the people here at this protest are not happy. It makes you wonder, will they ever be happy? It makes you wonder, at what point will enough be enough? It's a curious point, but you know what? There's one more week of COP to go. Will there be a big agreement by Friday? Will there be a new seismic Paris-style agreement of all of the nations at COP, the 196 UN member states, those countries of the world? Will there be one new big agreement in terms of changing the way that we live, regulating more businesses, potentially fining businesses that do not meet net zero commitments? There's a hell of a lot going on. You'd think it would be the dream of the people here protesting, but something tells me that the people here today just love protesting too much.
Well, that was a great report there from Tom Harwood. It really was. I have to say, I sort of followed the week very closely. Lots and lots of virtue signalling and a lot of nonsense talked. Alok Sharma, who is the president of this COP26, who is not exactly the most inspiring political figure, standing up on stage and saying, I feel that the end of coal is close. Well, I tell you what, Mr. Sharma, this year the Chinese will burn 4 billion tonnes of it and the Indians 1 billion tonnes of it. Frankly, so much of what has been said means nothing without the cooperation of those big countries. Arlene, do you wish you'd been there at COP26 all week?
Well, Nigel, I thought you were going to go to a cave this week and avoid all television. So I'm quite surprised to hear that you've been listening very closely to COP26. But look, I mean, I think there has been some successes during the week. I mean, I do actually believe in the deforestation pledge. I think that's a good thing that we're going to stop that across. I think it's 130 countries have signed up to that, and to actually try and reverse. Because I'm a great believer in planting more trees and having trees as a natural carbon capture across the piece. So, I mean, I'm in favour of that, but I do think some of the hyperbole that has come from COP26 has been really quite incredible, and everybody's trying to outdo each other on how green they are, and I'm greener than you. And I think Tom's report there just showed that there are so many people there for other reasons as opposed to saving the planet. I saw Palestinian flags. We've heard that there is SNP people there wanting an independent Scotland. So it looks as if it's a composite protest as opposed to a protest in relation to the environment.
Yeah, and Arlene, I'm absolutely with you. I'm tired of hearing all the negatives. What about some positives? Yeah, what about not just protecting forests from being cut down, but planting new ones as well. A lot of things we could talk about in terms of do that properly and get a big biodiversity uptick as well. So yes, I want to hear some more positive things. But what hypocrisy? What hypocrisy? The Prime Minister stands up and says, we're going to stop deforestation. Well, the biggest power plant in this country is the Drax power plant in northern Yorkshire, and there we burn trees. Yes, that's right. Trees that come from the Baltic states and come from North America. We burn trees, and we actually use taxpayers' subsidy by putting extra expense on their bills. We subsidise all of this, and it's now the biggest single CO2 emitter in this country. This biofuels nonsense has to end, and if the Prime Minister had stood up and said that, I'd have a bit more respect for all of this. Sorry, Paul, I was on my hobby horse there, but it drives me bonkers.
Yeah, no, I noticed. I completely agree with Arlene around the hyperbole of the debate. There has been hysteria, there's been hyperbole, and my problem with it is actually, yes, climate change is a serious issue. Unquestionably, yes, we need an international approach to dealing with it. Of course we do. But these doomsday scenarios that some of the politicians and the media and various activists are constantly trotting out, I think just undermines their case in many respects. So I think we need a more temperate debate and a more proportionate debate. We shouldn't just constantly go for the worst case scenarios when having this debate, which is what too many people do. And actually, we need a plan. And this is the big problem. It's one thing saying we need to transition to a new green economy, fine. But when you have across the world millions of people working in industries that will fall by the wayside during that transition, and you have no plan in place for making sure that those people stay in work and their communities are not decimated. When you don't have a plan for, if people have got to get rid of their boilers, get heat pumps, buy electric cars, how are they going to afford that? Then really it just becomes posturing. And I fear there's an awful lot of posturing going on in this debate, and it's really not helpful.
Well, in response, if Mr. Sharma was here, he would tell you that this week in Glasgow, countries have backed a tech plan to reach net zero. There has been a deforestation pledge with 100 countries signing up. He would tell you that India has signed up for a net zero target in 2070. And the finance industry will be forced to show their net zero plans. These, apparently, are the great gains this week. In a moment, we'll cross briefly to the US and look at what's happening. The Democrats, it looks like, have got the same problems the British Labour Party had in the 2019 general election.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, lots of subjects this week under discussion, some of it quite passionate, and your views flooding in. Brian says, when it comes to climate change, surely the elephant in the room is the huge rise in the world's population. Yes, Brian, in my lifetime, the sheer rise in population is frightening. Brian, rising population is the biggest single factor, no question.
Stuart tells us, please stop using the word sleaze. This is not sleaze, it is corruption. And yes, I voted for Boris. Never again.
Brian thinks corruption is rife in this country and has been for many years, and MPs are not interested. I worked in education for 42 years and numerous jobs were filled due to who people knew, often on inflated salaries. Nepotism is costing the nation dear. I suspect Brian was nothing very much new in that, sadly. Arlene, do you have some messages over there?
Yeah, I have. So Jeff, just on the subject you've been talking about, has resigned to what's been going on. He says sleaze and corruption will always be a part of politics and the human condition. And then Will has said, when political parties have been in power for too long, they think that they can get away with anything. Just look north of the border to Scotland and see what the SNP are doing. So some views there in relation to the subject we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, and lots of feedback on the cross-channel stuff. Brenda saying, you ask how many more migrants will be let into the UK before action is taken. In my belief, Johnson and Patel have no intention whatsoever of taking any meaningful action.
And Richard is feeling rather cynical. He tells us, withdrawing from the protocol, just more bluster from Brian O'Boris and his Tory in name-only pals. They'll never trigger Article 16 as they want the problems to continue so they can use it to take us back into full EU membership, just like all the bluster on the illegal immigrants.
Now, look, Richard, you know, there's nobody more cynical about the political class than me when it comes to Europe, but no one's taking us back in. It ain't going to happen. John says Major's lacked credibility ever since he signed Maastricht. Robert mocks Priti Patel. Water taxes are doing very, very well after only trading for 2 years. Right, lots. I mean, we could spend the whole day just reading out your messages, and thank you for them. Now, Tuesday in America was perhaps a little bit bigger in terms of those election results than you realise. Republican Glenn Youngkin defeated Democrat Terry McAuliffe in a tight race for the governor's seat of Virginia. Interesting. Youngkin getting over 50% of the vote. That was 12 points up from where he'd been last time. In New Jersey, there was another governor's race where Philip Murphy, the sitting Democrat governor, just about hung on. And interestingly, right across the country, there were elections for school boards. Gosh, I wish we had that in this country. And we've seen some big, big changes taking place there. One of the issues that really hit the fore in Virginia was education. Parents, not parents who'd voted for the Republicans, not parents who were fans of Donald Trump particularly, parents living in the northern part of Virginia, a very wealthy part of the state, indeed a very wealthy part of America, but they don't want their kids being taught critical race theory. They don't want their kids being brought up to hate America and everything it's ever stood for, or indeed stands for today. And I thought I'd sort of get Paul in on this. It's quite interesting, Paul. You know, we hear about AOC and those very much on the left. Indeed, there are congressmen and women in the Democrats who want to defund the police. There was a referendum actually in Minneapolis on defunding the police. It was defeated. And it seems to me the Democrats have made the same mistake the British Labour Party made, that the hard left gets in and you find that half of your natural vote feels alienated by what you're doing.
I think actually over the last few years there's been some striking parallels between what the Democrats have been doing and what the British Labour Party have been doing. The Democrats, like the British Labour Party, over recent years have become much more kind of middle class and metropolitan in their outlook, more globalist, very much more liberal. And in doing so, in taking that trajectory, undoubtedly they have lost large parts of working class, blue collar America, large parts of the Rust Belt. And, you know, that if you sort of take that in the context of Britain, that's the Labour Party losing the Red Wall for arguably very, very similar reasons. Whether or not they'll be able to win them back, I'm not sure. I mean, these elections were seen as something as a referendum on Biden. And I think it's arguable to say that it hasn't turned out particularly well for him. But the danger, I think, for the Labour Party is if they look at what happened with the presidential election and say, look, Biden won, so therefore we've really got nothing to worry about, just carry on this path, one more heave, and we'll be back in next time. I think they're going to get a rude awakening because I don't sense at all people in that red wall, in those red wall constituencies, flocking back to the Labour Party anytime soon. So there are real parallels between the two situations.
It's fascinating. Yeah, we've got the red wall, and in America it's the Great Lakes. It's kind of Pennsylvania right through the lakes to Wisconsin, and they really are now the key battlegrounds in America. So, Arlene, it looks like Donald Trump could be back in 2024, says he tongue-in-cheek.
Well, I mean, I think people need to understand where Virginia is in terms of geography and politically as well. Biden, as I understand it, had a double-digit lead in Virginia when he won the presidential election. And yet here is a governor who went out on a particular campaign, you're right, around education and the fact that critical race theory was being talked about, wokeism was being talked about. I had a conversation with Professor Eric Kaufman on Friday around all of this, and he said that this is the start of the kickback in America in relation to what has been going on with the hard left. And I think it is interesting to see if that then translates into something here in the UK around some of the events that we have seen. Kathleen Stock event, of course, down in the university. Are we going to see a reaction here in the UK in the manner that we've seen in America? Because sometimes that does happen. Paul's right to talk about the parallels between Labour and the Democrats and what's been happening. But I think we're going to see more of a conversation about some of those elements that put this gentleman, Youngkin, in as governor will come over to the UK.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So many of the arguments and debates on both sides of the pond are so similar. It is really quite remarkable. Well, I was teasing you a bit there, but I think Donald Trump will win in 2024. I really, really do.
God forbid. God forbid.
No, I think he will, and it'll be a good thing for us because he's pro-British, which Biden clearly isn't. That's my opinion. The last story we're going to discuss and debate and look at today is a story that I never ever thought I'd be covering or even debating. But it's something I've heard a lot of in the last couple of weeks. Are the royals becoming too vocal? Well, both Prince Charles and his son William spoke at COP26 about changing the way both society and indeed the whole economy operate and work. And there are some of us that fear that they are stepping over the line, not just standing up and doing good charitable work and acting as patrons, but in fact getting involved in politics. Let's have a listen to...
After all, if we are to restore the critical balance between people and planet, we need to protect, restore and invest in nature. Investment in natural capital, including fostering more species-rich systems rather than sterile monocultures, can support productive and resilient agriculture, forestry and aquaculture, while avoiding the pitfalls of climate change, land degradation, resource depletion, pollution and insect decline.
Ours is a common mission, to look without fear or despair at the challenges ahead in this crucial decade, and to believe that we humans have the ingenuity to make the seemingly impossible possible. But only if we put our collective minds to it. For many of you, world leaders and governments in this room, that means demonstrating leadership and persuading your electorates how much this matters. For others, business leaders and philanthropists, it means transforming the clean green option into the cheapest, best and most obvious choice. Put together, it means ensuring that the brightest and boldest amongst us in all sectors of society are given the support to find the answers to the most important question we face: how to repair the planet.
Now, from Charles, this is no surprise. I sat in the European Parliament in 2007 when he said within 7 years the North Pole would completely disappear. But for William to get himself involved, well, maybe they think there's no opposition. Maybe they think it's a completely settled view and it's a safe thing to do. Well, certainly in my peer group, there's been lots of muttering about this. And it was interesting to see today's Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, who has never, ever, he questions many things. He's never, ever questioned the royal family. But Peter Hitchens saying in today's Mail on Sunday, I have just stopped supporting the monarchy. I simply can't do it anymore. I'm not a Republican or anything silly like that. I'd like a proper monarchy. But the House of Windsor's total mass conversion to green orthodoxy has destroyed the case for this particular royal family. Now, I know that Peter Hitchens is paid to be controversial and to write a column on a Sunday. But Paul, I've got deep misgivings about the royal family getting involved as deeply as this.
Well, I mean, it's sold, isn't it? And I say this as a Republican myself, although not a terribly enthusiastic one. But it's sold on the basis that these people are above politics. They're above politics. You don't have a presidential figure who's got, political views and has been involved in politics in their previous life. These people kind of are above it. And it strikes me that actually in more recent years, they've become more and more politically active. So if you are a monarchist, and especially if you disagree with some of the views they've been arguing, I think you're right to feel uneasy about it. My view is quite simple. If they want to get involved in politics, if they want to have activist views, relinquish their role, stand for election, and then argue your view in the House of Commons like everybody else has to do.
Arlene, you're a monarchist, as I am. Do you understand my misgivings and indeed Peter Hitchens's too?
A bit over the top, if I'm honest, about all of that. I mean, as you know, the environment has long been something that all of the members of the royal family have felt very strongly about. Prince Philip spent his life advocating around sustainability and the environment. He passed that on to his son, and indeed, obviously, he has passed it on to his son. So it's something that they feel isn't political. I think they feel it is far above politics. It's something that they feel they're called to do. I don't think they would ever get involved in party politics. Her Majesty the Queen has always been very assiduous not to get involved in party politics, and she's right not to. I didn't know Paul was a Republican. But there you go. I'm not. I'm a very strong monarchist. I always will be. And I think they do a marvellous job for the whole of the United Kingdom and will continue to do so.
Well, Arlene, you're right. Of course, the Duke of Edinburgh was a great environmentalist, a great one for habitat restoration and all of those things. And you're right. He has passed that on. I haven't got a problem with any of that. My problem is that standing on a platform and backing a net zero agenda is actually of itself intensely political, because guess who's paying the bill? It's ordinary people out there. Yeah. So I think there is a real issue here. I've no doubt. Again, like all these issues, they'll come back and we'll debate them again. My thanks to Arlene. My thanks very much indeed to Paul. That's it today from The Political Correction. I'm back here on Monday at 7, but up next, right here on GB News, is Alistair Stewart.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less.